All right. Episodes 1 and 2 for Lord of the Rings of Power have dropped on Amazon Prime, dropping every Friday. Um, this won't be as in depth because obviously we're a couple of days off of episodes 1 and 2. We don't have Michael, right? Big Mike on the horn. Make sure you check out our Lord of the Rings draft of characters, or just our Lord of the Rings draft, excuse me, because he changed up the rules on us last second. Make sure you check out our feed to preview this upcoming show. Let me just give you the lay of the land for this show. We got three characters that are carrying over that are basically household names from Peter Jackson's trilogy. We have Galadriel, who's the main character, formerly played by Cate Blanchett. She is the lead in this ensemble cast. Along with that, you have Elrond, played by Hugo Weaving in the original trilogy. And then we have Sauron in human form that is making an appearance in this show, formerly played by A Fiery Eye. So here, thousands of years before the events of the Fellowship of the Ring and the Hobbit, we have Sauron basically as the first henchman, or I don't even know how to describe it, serving this lord, this evil figure, Morgoth, Ricky Flicks. I just want to get your instant reactions on this show, the characters we see, what stuck out from your initial viewing.
Visually, it was good. Like visually, it was better than the trailers on my phone on Twitter. I liked it a lot visually, but this was a bit slow and it was a bit boring. I got the temptation to go on my phone a decent amount, even with the visuals. But at the end of the day, I thought it was good. Similar to House of the Dragon, where it's setting up for the series. I felt like this was setting up a lot of the series. Where I think it differs, it's where it's like House of the Dragon. Yes, you have the story and the action similar to Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, but you don't have the politics, the rivalries, the inner workings that you do with House of the Dragon. And you could say, oh, like it didn't have Game of Thrones to prequel it or whatever, to do it before. But like House of the Dragon, like if that came out before Game of Thrones, that still had rivalries, that still had the politics in it, that still had the inner workings. You don't have any of that in this show yet. So don't worry, I'm sticking with it. I still think it's good. There were some great action sequences. Galadriel was sick in that fighting sequence with the snow troll, and some other great action in here as well. But waiting for more. Looking forward to Friday to see if it develops a little bit more.
I was impressed by this series for a number of reasons that we'll talk about. I did think visually it was up to par with the movies. The production value was there. Not only was it visually there, it sounded amazing. The music was on point. The world was expansive. I think they did a great job developing the different countries or kingdoms that were visited here. A big part of the original Lord of the Rings is how beautiful like the Elvish kingdoms are. I think they captured that perfectly in this show thus far. A lot of elves, which I do like. I think they're one of the most interesting peoples here. I do think I agree it's slow. I think it is made especially for those who are committed to the books, who know the story, right? And that know the outside workings of even just the main storylines from Tolkien. There's obviously a lot of background that goes into these worlds. They're expansive, and I think that was displayed almost to a fault here. You're going to many different parts of not just Middle Earth, but different parts of this world within 2 episodes that are almost. I had a hard time following the map that they were using. They were trying to help you out. They were labeling different places. But if you told me to name another place other than Rondon and Middle Earth here, I don't think I could, just because I don't have that familiarity. I think it's great for those who are committed to the Tolkien world, have read the Tolkien books, or have watched the movies, either The Hobbit or Jackson's trilogy for odds on end. I think for the common person, though, like you watch House of the Dragon compared to these first 2 episodes, you think the House of the Dragon just goes harder. And it's just I feel like when I watch the first 2 episodes of Rings of Power, I'm pulling out the Wikipedia right after. I'm going to a recap or summary of the episode I just watched. I'm not doing that with House of the Dragon. I perfectly understand what's going on, right? And I have enough familiarity with the show where I can make just a general audience's like logic. I can use that and make connections to what I've seen previously. Here, I don't have a firm grasp on Tolkien's world. And I think it's just harder to comprehend for a general audience member. And I think that's a huge difference between House of the Dragon and Rings of Power. Did you feel that too?
Yeah, this world's just so big, monstrous. Like Westeros, it's all like in England and Spain. Like if you just put it in that perspective, this is like the entire world. It's absurd what they're trying to conquer here. And I felt like I was just bouncing around every 5 minutes to a different country. And yes, it wasn't actually like that, but that's what I felt like a lot of times, especially episode 2. But it's simple though. Like if you take that out, the story's simple. And I think that's really beneficial for a show that's trying to get you not just for this season, but seasons going further where you get a firm grasp of what's going on. And then you could pick up everything else, like all the different kingdoms and like countries that I'm describing them, all the different kingdoms. You could pick that up similar to like what you did in Game of Thrones. You're picking up Winterfell, you're picking up Westeros, you're picking up Dorne and Valyria and whatever, right? So you just as you get committed to the show, you'll get committed to these characters and kingdoms. That's what they're banking on with this huge budget. And I think honestly, just to add on to this, I am committed, but also because of the acting. The acting is good. The act like Elrond, young Ned Stark, he's a beast. The guy,
Robert Aramayo, like he is the best actor in the show, in my opinion. Best performer.
very good. Very good. And like Galadriel, her character's a bit annoying how committed she is to her role here. Centuries searching for Sauron. But you know what? She's also really good as an actress. She's really good. And all these other actors and actresses are good as well. But I would say definitely the star is Robert, whatever his last name is, the guy that plays Elrond. He is definitely the guy that I was like, wow, you're good at acting.
He's so charming, and he has that like classicalness to him. Plays, you're right. You said young Ned Stark in that pivotal moment with the flashback sequence where we find out about Jon Snow's origins as a Targaryen. I'm interested in a couple characters here. I don't know much about Arondir yet, but I think that elf has a lot of potential to be pretty amazing. He seems very badass. He has an interesting dynamic with this village that he's supposed to be watching over, right? Because this village apparently has a relationship, like a alliance, excuse me, with Sauron and Gormoth, right? From at least traditionally. And then he strikes up this relationship with this woman, and her son has access to this weapon that has Sauron's like sigil in it, right? The symbol of Sauron. So it's interesting. Maybe it makes me think like maybe Sauron is this kid's dad. Like maybe Sauron somehow is connected to this kid. Like why else would he have this weapon? And he's wielding this power that it has. And he's taking it with him as a cliffhanger from episode 2 into episode 3. But I think Arondir plays a huge factor here relating the elves to this this village that has a connection to Sauron and Gormoth, right? But I kind of got a sense he was like going to be like the badass elf, like kind of the Legolas that you see going down the elephant's tusk and just like ripping like arrows. We didn't get much action from him, but I anticipate that when everything picks up a little bit and you get comfortable with the world, that's gonna be someone to look out for, and I would assume a fan favorite.
Yeah, I completely agree. We've seen nothing except just him being an alpha when he goes into that bar in the village and like doesn't fight, but you know he can kick that guy's butt. Like that's what you got out of him. So we're just waiting for that Legolas moment that you said. He's definitely going to be the Legolas of this show.
I like also, we talked about the elves. They had such a heavy presence here. Galadriel, we're going to talk about in a little bit, but we also have early hobbits. They're not known as Harfoots, and they're going to become the hobbits that we've come to know in Peter Jackson's trilogy when we think of Frodo, Sam, and Bilbo and the boys, right? Merry and Pippin. I think they did a good job of almost establishing when they're introduced, when they show the hunters and they've come earlier than expected. They show them coming, the Harfoot coming out of the trees and out of hiding, and they capture almost like this fellowship vibe when the Shire is first shown off, and the imagery and like the lighting of it all. And it seems like they're such happy-go-lucky people. You could tell these people, oh yeah, these are hobbits. That's the kind of association we're seeing between the show and the movies. That's like where I was like, okay, there we go. But I don't necessarily like the actors that we're getting out of this. Like I look forward to seeing the elves a lot more than the Harfoot. And I think the Harfoot, like the reason that we're starting to get intrigued is because you have this giant who comes out of a meteor at the end of episode 1, and Nori, right, who is this I think she's adventurous. She wants to go outside of this Harfoot lifestyle. She thinks she's meant for something more. I don't love her so far, and I think they're trying to really hard use this this giant aspect, literally, to get you intrigued. But I'm just not buying it. Just give me more of Arondir, give me more of Elrond, and Galadriel. Kind of like I wasn't really excited for after episode 2, but did you feel that same way, or are you looking forward to this giant and Nori like dynamic that we have?
I'm still excited for Galadriel. Just to start off, I'm still excited just by what she's shown in this series so far. Not only with her acting, but the action sequences. Like I mentioned, the snow trolls in my we first started talking about this.
Yeah,
she looks like a beast, like an alpha. So I'm looking forward to her. But going back to Nori, you're exactly right. The Harfoots are the worst part of this show so far, and the only thing that's keeping me with their storyline is the giant, because I want to know how is he connected to Sauron and everything else going on, because some way, somehow he is. And that's what's going to draw the Harfoots into this story. It's through this giant. And that's how that's going to get them out of this hiding and migrating type of species, humans, into, okay, let's go to the Shire. That's how it's going to happen. And I just want to know, first and foremost, is with this giant. And that's what's keeping me in the story right now. And we talked about on the Lord of the Rings pod, the character draft, top billing. Frodo, the Hobbits, not my favorite part of Lord of the Rings. Not my favorite part. So the Harfoots, they're not going to be my favorite part of Rings of Power. They're just simply not. So I'm interested in the elves and everyone else, except them for the most part. They're way down the tier.
100%. Things might change, and like if they start interacting with the elves and these characters that we've come to like so far, like an Elrond or a Galadriel, that's a good sign. Galadriel, I think, has been a strong character. I didn't like episode 2 as much, just because we just basically have her interactions with I think it's Halbrand is his name, with the stranded ship and everything. But I did like the story at the beginning. She is the Galadriel we see has very limited screen time in the Peter Jackson trilogy. She is a strong being on the same, almost nearly the same level as like a Sauron. So like, how is she going to gain this power over time? She's seen as very rebellious. She's very stubborn. She's not as respected as I kind of thought she was going to be compared to like the Jackson trilogy. So we're anticipating this journey is going to be something special. And I also like seeing that relationship with Elrond, because you don't see those two communicate, but it seems like they have like in the original trilogy, it seems they have a tight connection here. So Galadriel, man, I think they did a nice job at the beginning too, showing the relationship with her brother and how she's not going to go to eternity. She's going to turn around and do what the justice that he deserves. All right. She's touched that darkness, as the brother said, and they didn't reveal in that first conversation they had. Right. So at the end of the first episode, the brother's saying, hey, you need to touch you have to come close to the darkness in order to see the light. She now sees the light, and we're off and running. So I'm interested to see her dynamic with Halbrand going forward, get her back with Elrond. Good stuff so far. Any thoughts on Galadriel?
Yeah, like she's looking for centuries, and she's found nothing with her crew in relation to searching for Sauron. Not years, not decades, centuries. Centuries. That's absurd to think about. I also will say they do a great job with the makeup as well, making these elves look like they have no wrinkles or anything else. Because some of the actors these ages, they definitely start developing wrinkles, but they do a great job. The makeup, definitely with that budget, they do a great job making these elves look like they haven't aged a day. So very good job there. I also will say they do a very good job, like compared to like the Lord of the Rings like trilogy, like actually explain like because elves like when they're in Middle Earth, like they still live for centuries, right? And I think maybe it's because they're more recent to like coming to Middle Earth. in this series versus like the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But like when Elrond goes to the dwarf kingdom, right? And it's like 20 years is nothing to him, but like that shows like the impact of 20 years to a normal human versus an elf. They do a great job with that versus like when you're in the trilogy, they don't really like feel that out at all. And I think it's maybe because like by then they know like how time is precious. But here it's like they still don't know that because they're relatively new to Middle Earth. And I think
Yeah.
they do a great job here with Rings of Power, exhibiting that so far, and also kind of just showing you where the world is at and how it's different from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I love that as well. So there's just some of the highlights that I love with that related to the Galadriel and the elves that I really like from this show versus like the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
It seems like they're really committed to using the map. And I think that's a good thing because for people like you and I who aren't familiar with Tolkien's work outside of Jackson's trilogy and then The Hobbit, like this is something we need to kind of get a grip on where we are in this world. They're doing, I think, the best they can, but it's just so expansive. I'm gonna have to look at a Wikipedia page afterwards. I just have no choice. It's very tough. But you brought up the dwarfs, and you talk about. I think my favorite part of these first two episodes is watching the relationship between Elrond and Durin kind of repair. Following this like 20-year absence that Elrond hasn't seen Durin, you kind of get also that vibe. It's like almost like a House of the Dragon. You start to hear all these houses' names again, and you see like the Lannisters, Jason Lannister in the most recent episode acting, right, like a Lannister. It gives some satisfaction to the audience. Here, Elrond goes to see Durin. You see like the rivalry between the elves and the dwarves, and you're like, okay, this is what I'm familiar with. I'm back in Lord of the Rings. I think my favorite part of these two episodes, and it's been a little bit of a lack of action so far, but seeing Elrond and Durin kind of make up, both are very charming performances. It's hard not to like either of these characters, and definitely Durin's given off a lot of Gimli vibes. Somebody that you're going to root for, someone who can't hold a grudge. If he knows the person and he has a relationship with them, he's got a soft heart, although he tries to display something harder on the outside. And I think Elrond's just super charming. He'll get anyone to do what he pleases. And it also shows the heart he has, where he's like, he obviously wants this tower built. He needs the dwarfs in order to do so. He has a relationship with Durin. I think it was interesting to watch that conversation because what became a point of emphasis is the life of an elf in terms of its span. They're immortal, right? And Durin is not immortal, right? He is mortal. So he is not going to live forever. Elrond says, oh, it's only been 20 years since we saw each other. And Durin's like, that's a lifetime for me. Like literally you think it's nothing. And then we talk about Galadriel, who spent centuries trying to find Sauron. Like that's 4 Durin lifetimes, that are like trying to, that have lived during that time. So it's just interesting to see how they view life based on like what species they are. And I think you're gonna see a mending, I guess, of the relationship, almost like we saw with Gimli and Legolas. We're seeing that with Elrond and Durin, and hopefully it leads to some progress made between the two species.
Yeah, and like the tower, whatever architect, it was like the Leo meme, like, and the pointing at the TV screen. That's like, oh, there's one of the towers. There it is.
Yeah.
So I'm interested. That's like another thing for like Lord of the Rings trilogy fans. Like, all right, like how is that like gonna turn?
I've seen
into,
those
like,
click.
Right, exactly. Like, how is that gonna turn into, instead of being a force for good, a force for evil?
Exactly. And I'm just looking for those moments. I think that I'm going to be familiar with. Like even seeing an orc at the beginning was huge. I was just like, okay, yeah, I've seen those orcs before, and the snow orc and everything like that. I thought that was the CGI was a little sketchy there. That was the only time I was watching the show, and I was like, okay, maybe I'm not buying as much. As soon as they went to the Elvish Kingdoms, I'm like, okay, there it is. I also didn't like that actor at the beginning. I don't know what his name was, but his lines were kind of really corny to me, and I don't think the dialogue was very sharp. The elf that was alongside Galadriel, who actually stands up to Galadriel, I thought that actor was terrible. I didn't enjoy him at all.
He reminded me of a poor man's Ron Weasley or something like that.
It just, I was hoping, I was fingers crossed that like, okay, we're not going to see a lot of this guy because he's nowhere near the level of a Morfydd Clark as Galadriel or a Robert Aramayo as Elrond. Like those two are like they're stellar in my opinion. And then I think Arondir is going to be like basically almost like a similar to like a Jon Snow, just like people are going to like fawn over him, and he's also just going to be the badass character of this show. So that's what I'm looking for in episode 3. Anything that you are, yeah. What are you keen on in episode 3? What are you looking for?
Well, I honestly think it's the village leaving, and with the Sauron sword and the elf, I forget Amir, what's his name again? The elf that lives in the
Arondir?
village, Arondir. I think that my favorite parts of episodes 1 and 2 weren't that. It was Galadriel, or it was Elrond, then Galadriel. But my most intriguing parts are with Arondir and the giant, because I have less familiarity. I have less like, what the hell? How is this going to relate to everything and relate to these other two kingdoms that I do have, or other two storylines that I do like? So I think that's what's intriguing to me, is how are these other two storylines that for me aren't very strong right now, or at least not very as intriguing, going to have an impact, because clearly they do have promise, especially because they have the direct connection to Sauron, and they have a direct connection to a giant which just came from the sky and has dark like tendencies like a wizard or something like that. That's what I'm interested in. But I'm also, of course, interested in the like two storylines that I like, of course. So the show is working for me. It's just a little slow.
I do want to see Sauron in physical form. That's obviously something I want to see sooner rather than later. I think that's most Game of Thrones fans. But I also think what the show does well is that it does have you yearning for more. There's a bunch of like cliffhangers from this episode, whether it's the giant with Nori, whether it's Halbrand with Galadriel on the ship, whether it's Elrond and Durin, whether it's Arondir and this village that he's looking over, and them abandoning the village, and the orcs that are now passing through, right, these lands. I think it just has you excited for the future. Like, it's as boring as it might be at points, you still are curious, like what is this going to lead to? What is this giant going to lead to? How are they going to help the Harfoots? And the Harfoots, how are they going to end up interacting with people like the elves somehow, you know? I had something else I wanted to say, but I think I just brain farted. Go ahead.
No, but like the Harfoots, like if we look to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, like they have a strong connection, the hobbits do, to Gandalf, a wizard. Maybe the Harfoots get a strong connection to this giant that's a wizard.
Mystical,
maybe.
yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that's like leaning to that. And I will say, just going back to Sauron, I thought we were going to see a pre-existing Sauron, like pre-form deadly Sauron. I thought it was going to be like a coming up. So I was a little shocked by that. And I was shocked by this being peacetime, quote unquote peacetime. I was shocked. And I thought it was bold. I know it's not.
There's denying it.
Right. So it's interesting that they're going on that path as well. But hopefully, because I do think like there's 8 episodes left, right? There's plenty of time. But if they don't pick it up by the next 2 episodes and we're in the middle of the season, there hasn't been anything yet, then I would be worried. But for now, I do like waiting for Sauron, the anticipation for now, and the anticipation for more action and getting to that Sauron storyline. I do like the anticipation for now.
I will say, an edge it has for House of the Dragon. You brought up like how House of the Dragon is much more entertaining show. This one, is more for everybody. Like House of the Dragon sometimes goes a little too hard. It's a little too dark, and the concepts in it, like, it's not for everybody. Even for some adults that just don't want to get trapped in like watching that and the negativity that it brings. Like here, you do have a lot of like hope. A big part of like Lord of the Rings, the original trilogy, and we talked about with Big Mike, is like good versus evil. There's a lot of good in this show, and there's humor, and there is, as I said before, there's hope. So it makes you buy in a little bit more if you're used to just I don't know, just non-Game of Thrones viewing, you know? So it has that going for it. And I think that's going to capture some viewers instead of House of the Dragon. Like, people don't want to see negativity. They don't want to see incest. They don't want to see gore. People, you know, the guys' intestines who would like rip off half their torsos. Like, the people are sometimes not interested in that. and instead and less interested about like politic talk and like conspiracy backstabbing, but more relationships built between these different types of people, and an overall more fantastical story that relies more on like magic and elves and like mystic arts that Game of Thrones is kind of missing right now, other than the fact they have dragons.
Yeah, this is definitely much more appealing. And it also has that, like, this is still prestige TV. This is not a slight, but like the storyline, like with the 20 years with the dwarves, like that's a storyline that will never, like, as in that back, like personal storyline with House of the Dragon, that wouldn't be belabored at all. You know what I mean? Like that whole like emotional pull with that.
Every decision made in House of the Dragons by a character has to do with gaining power. That's not the
Yes,
case in the Rings of Power. Like that
exactly.
people like the people they're looking like Nori, she doesn't have like this plan to eventually like rule the kingdom. Like
Just a
Elrond
good
is not
person
looking
helping a
to rule
giant.
the kingdom, you know? Like there's not evil intention from all of these characters. There's actual good in the heart of a lot of these characters, as opposed to I mean, not Heart of the Dragon. Um,
House of the
whatever.
Dragon has nobody.
House of the Dragon is just Dark
Rhaenyra.
Souls everywhere. Just Dark Souls. Like people just want to be ruling. People are obsessed with the crown and the throne itself.
And we
Just a
love
way
that.
different tone. Yeah, it's just a way different tone, and it's a lot people. A lot of people love it, right? And but Rings of Power might be for those who have a different cup of tea and those who are more into that. But I think also storyline wise, it reminds me a little bit, Rings of Power I'm talking about now, how it's going into so many different directions. I feel like I'm in the middle of like season 4 or 5 Game of Thrones, you know, where I'm watching Daenerys in like one world. I'm going to the Wall in another aspect. I'm going to Bran and like his journey. Like there's so many different directions of the story. Some are more entertaining than others, but it feels like the heart of Game of Thrones, the vastness of the world compared to how small House of the Dragon is right now, where you're basically hopping from Westeros to Dragonstone back to Westeros. You know what I
But
mean?
like I know what you mean. I agree, but I think that comparing to Rings of Power, like we're bouncing around. It's just that we're not
No, I'm saying it's
dedicating
good.
so,
That was my
yeah.
connection to it. I'm just saying like that's kind of a good thing. They're just doing it right from the start. You know,
Do you think
Westeros, like season 1 of Game of Thrones, they're just going from a lot of times like Daenerys a little bit. They're not shining as much light on Daenerys and Khal Drogo.
they
A
picked it
lot of
up?
it's like a lot of it's taking place primarily in Westeros, right? In
Good reason.
yeah, where the throne is with
King's Landing.
Lannisters,
King's
King's Landing.
Landing.
That's it. Yeah, just to me, it's like it just feels so much bigger, and it feels like what Game of Thrones had to build up to. Lord of the Rings of Power is just starting out in this vast world.
Do you think that Rings of Power does what Game of Thrones did once season episodes went on, and they dedicate an episode to the Harfoots, or they dedicate an episode to like a specific area in Middle Earth? Do they eventually go that route, or do they continue bouncing around? I think they actually, if they were smart, I would think they would start dedicating the vast majority of episodes to specific lands to really ingrain us with characters and territories. If they really want a holistic show, I think, and there's so many different worlds, even more than how Game of Thrones. I think that's the way they should do it.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of just introducing the first 2 episodes. Maybe there's a reason why they had these first 2 drop at the same time, is to get you to know these different peoples again, right? They come back, and then it's also like we didn't get the dwarves, excuse me, till episode 2. Like the dwarves are back, the Harfoots, early hobbits, the elves have a heavy presence everywhere in this show. You know, I think that was just intentional, and I think I can see them locking in on more specific species for the majority of episodes. 100% agree. Good point. All right. Any final comments before we wrap up this reaction to episodes 1 and 2 for the Rings of Power?
Good potential was there, but just good for now. But there's potential.
I agree. We need a little bit more action. Okay. Little less dialogue. Don't get so bogged down with introducing the setting. Hopefully things pick up with episodes 3. I think they're just doing one this week. So episode 3 dropping this Friday. Make sure you're tuned to the feed all right, to catch our reactions. We're going to see if we can get Big Mike back on the horn because I think he could educate us and you listeners very much so. You guys know what we're talking about. If you listen to our Lord of the Rings draft, please make sure you go check that out. Also, we brought up the House of the Dragon, which I forgot the title of earlier. House of the Dragon, episode 3 reaction is earlier on the feed. Later on this week, we got She-Hulk coming up, and we might even have a draft in store for you later on. All right. That's going to do it for episode 143 of The Drive-In. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Also, leave a comment if you please. If you're listening on the feed right now, whatever listening platform you choose, make sure rate us 5 stars, leave a review. If you leave a nice review, we'll read it on the podcast. Simple as that. Okay. Make sure you're following on the socials, right? You want to keep up with all the latest Don't Worry Darling news, all right, and what's going on. Possibly what kind of drama, what possible drama, could derive from this production and from this upcoming release. Who knows? But make sure you're following the feed in order to do so at the Drive-In Pod on Twitter and Instagram. That's going to do it for episode 143 for Rich and Flicks and Dr. O. Until next time, we will smell ya.